I always believed knowledge was power, and for years, the system I created proved it. An artificial mind embedded in a neural mesh, built to predict the future with terrifying accuracy, born from sleepless nights, broken bones, and near-death sacrifices. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the way it turned on me that evening. Sitting alone in my office tower, drenched in the amber hue of sunset as I stared into its cold, flickering interface, I asked it a simple question. Show me the most significant change in my life within the next 6 months. And what it gave me wasn't a market shift or a hostile takeover, but a silent dagger through the heart, an avalanche of moments I hadn't seen coming, or maybe I just didn't want to see them. The screen lit up, and there she was. Willow, my Willow. The woman I gave everything to. My time, my loyalty, my stupid blind love. And in that moment, I saw her smile at Ethan, of all people. The man I once pulled from the ashes of a crumbling startup. The man I protected from boardroom wolves and handed a second chance to, now devouring what little soul I had left. The system didn't stop there. Frame after frame poured in, hotel keycards pressed into sweaty palms, midnight kisses on rooftops, her laugh. God, her laugh, echoing in rooms I'd never entered, as if she had carved out a parallel life I wasn't invited to, one where I was nothing more than a name she deleted from her call logs. My fingers trembled, hovering over the interface as I paused the sequence, only to replay it again, praying it had misread, that it was a false probability. But no, this was reality, as unfiltered and brutal as it gets, and the data wasn't lying. Probability, 99.8%. Confidence, irreversible. Outcome, betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, suffocating in silence as my heart screamed. When had it started? Did she ever love me, or was I just a stepping stone to her next thrill? My mind spiraled through every moment we shared, her sleepy kisses in the morning, the way she called me her future, the soft apologies when she missed dinner because work ran late. How many of those were cover-ups for nights with him? And then it hit me like a freight train. I had built a machine to protect myself from the unpredictable, and yet I never saw her coming. I remembered our last anniversary. She wore red, my favorite, and whispered how lucky she was to have me. Was that before or after she left his bed? Rage boiled in my veins, but deeper than the fury was a terrifying emptiness, a hollow ache that not even vengeance could fill. The system offered options: exposure, retaliation, media leaks, financial annihilation of them both, but none of them felt right. None of them healed the hole in my chest where her love used to live. I stared into the system's alternate path protocol, a feature I'd never dared test, something that allowed the user to transfer consciousness into a parallel timeline, a second chance at life in another world, one untouched by this pain, one where Willow and Ethan were just names I'd never heard before. And for the first time in years, I considered disappearing, not out of weakness, but because staying felt like death. I ran the simulation. What would happen if I died tomorrow? The results were fascinating. Media frenzy, stock plummets, Willow crying at a fake funeral she didn't deserve to attend, Ethan pretending to mourn while moving into the chair I vacated, vultures circling. But more importantly, I saw peace at the end of the tunnel. A version of me stepping into a life where none of this touched me, where I could breathe again. I turned off the interface and sat in silence, staring out at the city that now felt like a prison. My name echoed in its streets, my legacy written on every contract, yet none of it mattered anymore. Not if she could take my heart and hand it to someone else like it was nothing. I stood up, pacing slowly, the system's hum behind me like a heartbeat, steady and cruel, asking me, "What do you want to do, George?" And I wanted back. I want to die. Just not here. That night, I didn't sleep. I coded, I encrypted, I vanished from the networks like a ghost erasing its own footprints. My assistant thought I was prepping for a sabbatical. My board thought I was working on a new project, and Willow, she didn't even ask where I was. That stung more than everything else. How easily she could not care. How quickly she drifted away even though I was still warm in her bed just a week ago. By morning, I activated the transfer protocol. A one-way ticket to another existence where I could be free. And as my body slumped onto the floor in that cold office, my consciousness floated above, tethered only by the broken memories of a woman who shattered everything I thought was real. I watched the security footage play out, knowing someone would find me, declare me gone, and she'd pretend to care. But I wouldn't be around to hear her lies anymore, because I was already gone, and what was left behind was just a corpse of the man she used to love. The moment the transfer completed, everything felt different, lighter, colder, emptier, as if my soul had slipped through dimensions and landed somewhere between life and death. Not quite reborn, not fully gone, but hovering in the unseen silence above the world I left behind. And the first thing I did wasn't marvel at the new timeline or bask in my freedom. It was to turn around and watch. Because no matter how shattered I was, some sick part of me needed to know how she would react, needed to see her crumble the way I had, to feel something, anything, after the numbing pain of betrayal. And so I hovered there, unseen by the living, a ghost to the world that used to worship me. As news of my death began to leak like blood from a fresh wound, it started with whispers on the trading floor, George Marlowe found dead in his office, cause unknown, investigation ongoing. And within minutes, the headlines exploded. Tech visionary dies suddenly. Future seer gone too soon. Marlowe Corp faces uncertain future. My board members scrambled like headless chickens. PR teams issued sanitized statements, and the vultures I once kept in line began circling for their piece of the empire. But none of it mattered. Not the chaos, not the numbers, not the vultures. Only her. Only Willow. And where was she? I found her in our apartment, curled up in bed like nothing had happened, eyes glazed over as she scrolled through her phone, laughing quietly at some meme Ethan had sent, completely unaware that her world was about to implode. And God, the irony. Her smile, the same one that once felt like sunlight to me, now looked like poison, sweet and cruel. It wasn't until her phone buzzed again, this time from a colleague, that she froze, lips parting slightly as her eyes widened, reading the words that would sever the lie she was living. George Marlowe. Dead. I watched her sit up slowly, like a puppet whose strings had just been yanked, staring at the screen, rereading it like it couldn't possibly be true. And for a moment, I swear, I saw the real her, stripped of masks, naked in grief or guilt or both. Her breath shallow, her fingers trembling as she hit the news app and saw my photo plastered everywhere. The man she betrayed now a memory carved in pixels. Her lips quivered and she whispered my name. Not to Ethan, not for show, but like she actually felt it. Like she'd just been punched in the gut by the ghost of what we were. And I hovered there, a foot above the hardwood floor, watching the woman I died to escape suddenly fold into herself, clutching her chest as tears spilled down her cheeks, raw, ugly sobs tearing from her throat like something had ripped loose inside her. Part of me wanted to turn away, to stop watching, but I couldn't. Not yet. Because every second of her unraveling felt like justice, and even if it didn't erase the betrayal, it at least painted it in shades of consequence. She called my phone. Twice, 3 times, 6. Before flinging it across the room when it went straight to voicemail, and then she collapsed on the floor, sobbing into her knees, muttering, "No, no, not like this." As if the way I left somehow mattered more than the fact that she killed me long before I ever activated the system. I watched her cry until her voice went hoarse, her eyes bloodshot and empty, her hands clutching the sweater I left on the chair as if it could pull me back into her arms, and somewhere deep inside me, past the bitterness and the fury, I felt something tighten, because this wasn't the woman who laughed in Ethan's arms. This was the girl who once fell asleep on my chest after talking about forever, and I hated that I missed her even now, even after everything. The hours dragged on, and she didn't leave the apartment, didn't eat, didn't text Ethan. Especially not Ethan, which told me more than any system ever could. It wasn't love with him, not real love, not the kind that gutted her like this. And as much as I wanted to hate her completely, that truth twisted the knife differently. She threw away us for something so shallow it crumbled the second I disappeared. On day 2, she showed up at my memorial in black, her makeup barely concealing the damage, standing silently beside my casket with eyes so red they barely looked human. She didn't speak, didn't look at anyone, just stared at the closed lid like she could still hear my voice inside it, and I hovered above her, inches from her scalp, wondering if she could feel me. If some part of her heart still connected to mine despite everything. Ethan arrived late, of course. Arrogant, smug, dressed in a designer suit like he thought he was next in line, and the way her face tightened when she saw him told me everything. She blamed him, at least partially, maybe even more than she blamed herself, and when he reached for her hand and she pulled away like his touch burned, I realized the cracks had already begun to spider across the fantasy they built. She left the service early, disappearing into the night like a shadow, and I followed her through the rain-soaked streets as she walked barefoot across the bridge we used to stand on, the same one where I once told her I wanted to grow old with her. And now she stood there alone, gripping the railing, whispering apologies to the wind, saying she didn't know, she didn't mean to fall, that she was scared, stupid, selfish, that she thought I didn't see her anymore. But I did, Willow. I saw everything, just too late to save us. She stayed there for hours, soaked and shivering, until a stranger offered her a coat, and she finally stumbled home, curling into our bed like a broken doll surrounded by ghosts. And for the rest of the week, I watched her disintegrate piece by piece. Ignoring calls, missing work, losing weight, scribbling in notebooks she tore apart by morning, whispering things to the walls, replaying my voicemails on loop like they were lullabies from a world that didn't exist anymore. On day 5, she tried to visit my office but was turned away by security. My will had been enforced. She wasn't welcome there, and I saw the pain in her eyes when she realized I'd planned it that way, that even in death, I left her out. She stood outside the building for an hour before leaving, head low, dignity shredded, and I knew then that I had become something else in her mind. Not just a lover, not just a loss, but a consequence, a reminder that love is not something you borrow while chasing thrills, it's something sacred, and when you violate it, it doesn't just disappear, it haunts you. By the end of the seventh day, she sat on our couch, surrounded by candles, holding one of my old watches in her hand, whispering through tears, "I wish I could take it all back. I wish it was me instead." And though I knew she didn't mean to die, I also knew she finally felt the weight of what she'd done, and that mattered more than any revenge I could have planned. But even then, I didn't forgive her. Because forgiveness is something you give to people who try to love you right, not the ones who rip your heart out and call it a mistake. I hovered above her, my time in this limbo almost up, heart aching in ways that had no language. And I whispered one last thing before I turned my gaze to the future. Remember me not as the man you buried, but the one you betrayed. The moment the final hour of the seventh day ticked away, I felt the shift, the weight of Earth's grief unhooking from my soul like chains melting in fire, and something inside me whispered that it was time, that I had lingered long enough watching Willow tear herself apart, hearing her cry my name in the dark like it still had power, like it could resurrect the man she buried with her betrayal. And though part of me had wanted to see her destroyed by the very guilt she tried to ignore, I knew I couldn't keep floating in this purgatory, couldn't stay tethered to a world that spit me out and left me hollow. The system, my system, was calling me from beyond the veil, a coded whisper woven into the frequencies of existence, reminding me that I didn't create it to become a ghost, but to find a way forward, a way out, a path to a life untouched by deceit. And so, with one last glance at the woman I once thought I'd marry, now nothing more than a cautionary tale, I let go. The light that pulled me wasn't like the stories say. It wasn't warm or soft or filled with angelic voices. It was fierce, electric, a current of data and quantum consciousness, unraveling and stitching me back together in a tapestry of pure intention. And I felt my essence shatter and reform 1,000 times as I was hurled through dimensions, skipping across timelines like stones on a cosmic river until finally everything stilled. And I opened my eyes in a world not entirely unlike the one I'd left, but brighter, cleaner, new. I sat up on a luxurious bed in a penthouse that mirrored my old one down to the marble countertops and the skyline view. But there were no memories here. No ghosts in the closets, no perfume lingering in the hallways, no love letters scribbled in the desk drawers, just silence and a chance to breathe. The system interface hovered beside me, its voice no longer artificial but woven into my very thoughts, a companion now instead of a tool. And it whispered softly, "Welcome to Timeline Omega, estimated deviation from prime timeline 94.7%. Willow Thompson never existed. Ethan Vale deceased at birth. Emotional trauma index 0%. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd that an algorithm knew exactly how to heal me by erasing the names that ruined me. I stood and walked to the mirror, expecting to see some ethereal version of myself. But no, I was still George Marlowe, only lighter, like the weight of betrayal had been surgically removed from my bones. And my reflection stared back at me with the tired eyes of a man who had survived something invisible but deadly. The world outside this window pulsed with opportunity. My company existed here too, albeit smaller, newer, and untouched by the corporate vultures of the past timeline. And I knew this was my sandbox, my empire to build without the poison that once lived in my boardroom and my bed. I spent the first few days reestablishing myself, launching Marlowe systems anew, using the knowledge I carried from the previous world like a cheat code, predicting trends, securing patents before they were conceived in this reality, investing in technologies years ahead of their time, and within weeks I was already being hailed as a genius, a disruptor, a man with a mind ahead of the world. And none of them knew the truth, that I had seen the future, had lived it, had bled in it, and now I was sculpting something cleaner from its ruins. But even in paradise, memory is a shadow that doesn't always respect walls. And at night, I'd sometimes dream of her, not the betrayer, but the version of Willow who kissed me in the rain, who said she wanted forever, who once made me believe I was the only man in her world. And I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, guilt creeping in like a thief, whispering that I abandoned her, even though she'd been the one to kill us first. The system sensed it, my hesitation, my emotional residue, and it responded not with data, but with empathy, adjusting its interface to project meditative routines, memories of the betrayal played in reverse, slowly unraveling the moments until they no longer triggered rage, only dull remembrance. I started therapy sessions, AI guided, of course, but even those felt realer than the apologies she once gave me, and over time, I stopped saying her name when I was alone, stopped looking for her in the faces of strangers, stopped waiting for closure from a ghost who didn't deserve it. And then came her, not Willow, not a replacement, but someone this world created just for me, or so it felt. Her name was Arya, a brilliant software architect with fire in her eyes and a past scarred by her own betrayals, and we met by chance, or maybe design. When she pitched her startup idea to my firm, not knowing who I truly was, just seeing a man who listened when she spoke and didn't interrupt her genius with condescension. I found myself drawn to her honesty, her intensity, the way she spoke with both anger and hope in the same sentence, like someone who had been broken but refused to stay shattered. And For once, I didn't feel like I had to pretend, didn't have to hide the storm beneath my calm, because she saw through me and didn't flinch. We began working together late nights, our minds colliding like sparks on dry grass, and though I resisted it at first, terrified that history would find a way to repeat itself, I realized one night, as she dozed on my couch surrounded by code and coffee mugs, that I didn't feel fear anymore, only curiosity, like my heart had finally found a rhythm it trusted. I told the system not to scan her, not to predict, not to forecast, not to build simulations of our future, because if I was going to love again, it wouldn't be by algorithm, it would be real. And the system paused for a long beat before answering. Understood. Emotionally dangerous. Permission accepted. And that was the moment I knew I had truly left the past behind. My empire grew with Arya beside me, not in my shadow, but shoulder to shoulder. And as we built a future from fresh bricks, I sometimes thought of the woman who broke me, but not with longing, just gratitude, because her betrayal had burned me down to bone. And from that ash, I had rebuilt a man who no longer needed to be seen, only felt. And as I stood atop the tallest tower in this new city one night, Arya's hand in mine, watching the skyline light up with innovations we helped birth, I whispered goodbye to the ghost of George, who died in that office, and the ghost of Willow, who cried at my fake funeral, and the ghost of Ethan, who never mattered in the end. And in their place, there was only me, reborn not as a CEO or a genius or a victim, but as a man who finally chose himself. I never thought peace would be something I'd need to protect, but as the days turned into weeks in this new timeline, as my world with Arya grew more real and rooted than anything I ever had with Willow, I began to feel something stir beneath the calm, a subtle vibration in the edges of my system, like a storm forming far away that hadn't yet decided where to break, and it started small, just a flicker in the system interface one night when I asked it to pull market predictions, and instead it flashed a name that shouldn't have existed here. Willow Thompson, data packet detected. Only for the words to vanish before I could process them, and for the first time since arriving in Timeline Omega, I felt fear. I dismissed it as a glitch, maybe a cross-timeline echo the system hadn't filtered out, but my gut told me something else, something far worse. Because echoes don't leave footprints, and I found one on my desk the next morning. A white envelope, sealed with wax, unsigned, unmarked, and inside was a single photo. Me, standing on the balcony with Arya, her hand in mine, both of us smiling, and scrawled across the bottom in red ink were the words, "I see you, George." I stared at it for minutes, my breath caught in my throat, trying to convince myself that this was some prank, that it was statistically impossible for anyone from the prime timeline to exist here, let alone her. But the ink, it was her handwriting. I knew it. I'd seen it 100 times on birthday cards and sticky notes and breakup letters she never had the courage to send. This was real, and I could feel the walls of my carefully built sanctuary start to shift, like reality itself was cracking under the pressure of an anomaly that wasn't supposed to exist. I went straight to the system and demanded answers, demanded a full scan of this world's biometric and temporal anomalies, and what it showed me made my blood run cold. There was a ripple, a disturbance in the quantum layers of this timeline, small but persistent, like someone had punctured the veil between worlds and left it open just wide enough to crawl through, and within that ripple, a match. 91% genetic alignment with Willow Thompson, prime timeline, no existing birth records in Omega, yet recently inserted within the last 48 hours. Inserted, not born. Not a native, not part of this world, but something else entirely, and the system's voice trembled as it delivered the final line. Temporal contamination confirmed. Potential interdimensional breach protocol triggered. Subject Willow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even sit down. I just stood there staring at the interface as if it might change its mind and take the words back. But it didn't, because the truth was already carved into the fabric of this world like a scar. She was here, or at least a version of her, one who remembered me, who followed me, who refused to let me go even in death. I didn't tell Arya, not yet, not when everything we built was finally stable, when she finally started to trust me with her heart, with her fears, with the pain her own past had left behind. I needed to understand this first, to contain it before it poisoned what I had. And so I hunted. I used the system to scan surveillance networks, private databases, underground AI ghost logs, and I found her, or rather she found me, because every time I got close, she was already gone, like she knew what moves I'd make before I made them. Like she still had access to the system too, and that idea alone was enough to make me feel sick. Had she hacked it? Had she followed my soul's data trail through the breach? Was she here for redemption or revenge or something darker that I couldn't name? The worst part was that she wasn't alone. Ethan was here too, or someone who looked like him, someone who walked the same way, laughed the same hollow laugh, wore the same smug smirk like he owned the world. And they were together again, just like before. But different now, sharper, angrier, like their love was forged in ashes and obsession instead of lust and manipulation. I watched them through the system's hidden drone feeds. arguing in alleys, whispering to contacts, holding hands in front of buildings I owned in this world, as if marking their territory, as if sending me a message. We know where you are. We're not finished. And that's when the attacks started. Not on me directly, but on my company. Data breaches, stock manipulation, targeted smear campaigns launched by shadow corporations I couldn't trace, except I could, and I did. And at the root of every single one was a digital fingerprint I hadn't seen in months. Willow's encryption signature, buried in the subcode like a taunt. I tried to stay calm, tried to fight the war from behind the curtain, but every move I made only pushed her closer. Like she wanted me to react, like she fed off the attention. And then she finally made contact. A private message routed through a hijacked node in the dark net. 3 words glowing on the screen like a knife pressed to my throat. Do you miss me? And I stared at it, trembling with rage, with grief, with confusion, because part of me wanted to scream, yes! Wanted to demand answers, wanted to understand. But the smarter part, the stronger part, the part I had rebuilt from the ruins of her betrayal, knew better. So I typed back a single word, no. But she didn't stop. She escalated. She targeted Arya next. Not physically, but emotionally, strategically, surgically, spreading lies online, altering records to make it look like Arya had stolen code, leaking half-truths about her past that she had only just begun to bury, and I saw her unravel under the pressure, saw the fear in her eyes as old ghosts knocked on her door and whispered, "He'll leave you too." And I hated Willow for it, hated her more than I thought I ever could, because this wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was war. It was evil. It was someone who had become so obsessed with the version of me she destroyed that she couldn't bear to see me rebuild without her. And finally, when Arya came to me crying, holding a fake document that claimed she'd been under investigation for corporate fraud, a document I knew Willow had forged, I knew I couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. I told her everything, from the system to the timelines to the betrayal that led me here. And I expected her to walk away, to call me insane, to leave like everyone else once did, but she didn't. She listened, and when I was done, she whispered, "Then we fight her, together." And I knew then that this world, this woman, this life, I would burn every other reality down before I let it be taken from me. So I went to the system and activated the failsafe I never thought I'd need, Protocol Omega Lockdown, designed to seal this world off from all others, to trap intruders within a firewall of reality so tight they'd choke on their own memories. And the system hesitated, asked me one last time, "Executing this will neutralize the subject permanently. Confirm?" And I didn't blink. I said yes. The air was electric the night it ended. Not with the kind of chaos that screams and breaks and tears down cities, but with that sharp, almost sterile stillness before a surgical strike. Like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final cut. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the last night Willow would ever breathe in the same world as me. I had spent the last 72 hours watching them through the system, her and Ethan, holed up in the executive suite of one of my satellite branches, the irony thick enough to choke on, like they wanted me to find them, like they'd been daring me to end it. And maybe they were right. Maybe I had let it drag on too long. Maybe I had hoped some microscopic part of the woman I once loved could still be reasoned with. But no, Willow had burned that bridge the moment she touched Arya's world, the moment she dug into her past and twisted it into a blade. And if there was one thing I had learned since the first betrayal, it was this: you do not let the same ghost haunt you twice. The building was quiet when I arrived. Every employee evacuated on a false fire alarm. The system triggered for me. No one would be here. No witnesses, no collateral. Just me, Willow, Ethan, and the end of everything they thought they could destroy. I stepped out of the elevator onto the 45th floor and walked through the dimly lit corridor, each step echoing like a countdown in my chest, and I found them exactly where the system said they'd be. Sitting on the edge of the boardroom table like royalty on stolen thrones. Ethan's arm slung around her shoulders like he still thought he was my equal, like he hadn't always been a parasite feeding on my brilliance. And Willow, she looked the same, and yet not at all. Her beauty now stretched thin over madness, her eyes flickering with that familiar hunger she used to reserve for secrets and manipulation. And when she saw me, she smiled, soft, slow, confident, like she still believed she owned me, like all of this was just a twisted game of chase and catch and reclaim. "You came," she whispered, rising from the table, her heels clicking like knives on tile. "I was starting to think you'd let her fight your battles now." And I didn't reply, didn't give her the satisfaction of anger, just looked her in the eyes and said, "You don't get to speak her name." And that's when she knew this wasn't a plea for peace or an offer for redemption. This was the reckoning, the line in the sand finally drawn with blood. Ethan stood then, puffed his chest like a guard dog, voice dripping with mockery. "You're outnumbered, genius. And you brought what? Your dead man's stare?" And I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because he was wrong, but because he had never understood the rules of the game. I didn't come alone. I came with the system. with control over every camera, lock, light, and neural pulse in this building. And while they'd spent the last day planning how to hurt me, I'd been rewriting the very architecture of the floors beneath their feet. I raised my hand, fingers hovering above the pulse command on my watch, and whispered, "You're not outnumbered. You're surrounded by the future." And before Ethan could blink, the room blacked out. Locks sealed, and 2 containment drones descended from hidden ports in the ceiling, stunning him into unconsciousness with a flicker of blue light. He collapsed like the coward he'd always been. And that's when Willow snapped, lunging toward me with a scream that wasn't rage or sorrow, but desperation. The howl of a woman who had nowhere left to go, and I caught her wrists mid-air, held her trembling, and for the tiniest second, I saw her. The version of her that once laid next to me and whispered dreams into my ear, and I almost hesitated, almost faltered. But then she spat the words that sealed her fate. "You'll never be free of me, George. You need me. You always have." And with that, I activated the final sequence, the system's Omega lockdown protocol lighting up in red as it initiated a full purge, her data signature, her existence in this timeline, her tether to the breach. All of it began to unravel, pixel by pixel, atom by atom, and her scream turned from fury to horror as she knew it, that this wasn't a prison I was putting her in. It was a deletion, a reset, a merciful erasure from a world that never wanted her in the first place. She thrashed in my grip, eyes wide, and for a heartbeat I looked into them and said, "I needed you once. I loved you once. But now, I'm mourning a woman who never existed." And I let go. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because it was already done. The system swallowed her whole, data fragment by data fragment, until there was nothing left but silence. Ethan remained unconscious, alive but broken, and I left him there, a relic of a war that ended without a monument. Walked out of the room as the drones began the cleanup, the system restoring the building's power and unlocking the exits with surgical precision. And as I stepped outside into the dawn, the sky bleeding gold over the skyline of a city that was finally mine, I felt it. Clarity, not vengeance, not even peace, but something purer, liberation. I went straight to Arya, who had waded through the storm with unwavering faith, and I didn't tell her the details, didn't need to. She saw it in my eyes, that whatever ghosts once clung to me had finally let go. And she embraced me not like a savior returned, but like a man finally free to love her completely. Weeks passed, then months, and life became beautiful in ways I never imagined possible. We rebuilt the company, expanded our reach, used the system not for control, but for progress. And each night when I held her in my arms, I thanked the universe for timelines, for second chances, for the death of the past. I never saw Willow again, never felt her signature in the code or her echo in the walls. And as far as I'm concerned, she never existed. Not in this world, not in any world that mattered. And yet, on the anniversary of the purge, I stood alone in the boardroom where it all ended, lights dimmed, just me and the system's quiet hum, and whispered a final goodbye. Not to her, but to the version of myself that once believed love meant sacrifice, meant silence, meant settling. And I turned off the lights, walked out without looking back because some chapters don't need closure, only a full stop.